So looking at the percentages on this fight, that having that 1 DPS down this long has started to narrow things a little bit. It's actually now that 25% advantage we were seeing before is now down to 19%. Maybe, yeah, about 18% now, actually. So that is Midwinter starting to be able to claw their way back into this. Just that 1 DPS missing can make a huge difference.
Well, and there's also the fact when you look at boss health on this fight, is the very particular circumstance where only physical damage right now, when you see him running around the room, only physical damage can actually reduce his health. All magical damage is getting absorbed fully. But then when he kneels in the center and is recharging himself, now casters can actually unload on him and directly reduce his health bar as well. So you'll see his health kind of crawl a little bit until those vulnerability moments, and then it'll go down really quickly because everyone can focus.
Yeah, and there we are seeing that on Method's side now. His health is now dropping much more rapidly, as Ian was just explaining, down to 25%, 24%, taking a ton of damage. Midwinter's still at 42%, so we can see definitely how those start to ebb and flow here a little bit, but Midwinter now has their opportunity as well to start putting a whole ton of damage in, dropping him down to 35% already. Only about a 15% difference between these guys now. And we do, as you were explaining the battle res, the new battle res mechanic earlier, we do now have Roger Brown up once again for Method, so they are once again at full capacity, doing the absolute most that they are capable of. Oh, that was a big hit on Midwinter's side. They actually lost one of their DPS in that. We're able to battle res him immediately, though. Only 1 death for Midwinter, so they don't have to wait for that battle res charges or anything like that. So things are getting pretty close here. But over on Method's side, 5% on Korag. There's a lot of people dipping very, very low here. Bladdy's in trouble, super low at that point. Does barely survive through that. Korag at 3%. 2% now. This is going to be over here in just a moment. 1%. And down goes Korag! Midwinter, though, crawling themselves back, not too far behind. Korag at 7% on their side, 6% now as well. There's that orb out there doing tons of damage, but they're actually looking really, really stable right now. 3% on Korag. There's their opportunity to finish him off. 2%, 1%, and there he goes!
All right, so we're tied up at 3 apiece, and just a last couple of stretches of trash separating the raids from the final boss, who we'll get to in a minute. So there's another 2 tiers to ascend here. We see both guilds kind of rushing as much as possible. There's room, if you're racing like this, to skip some of these pulls because there are elevators and portals, and if you can make it to one, you can leash the mobs that were chasing you. And so they're probably not going to kill everything along the way, but there are some things they will have to deal with.
We even see over on Midwinter's side, they're actually using, I forget the exact name of the ability off the top of my head right now, the group stealth ability.
Shroud of Concealment.
Yeah, Shroud of Concealment. They're using that over here, actually chaining them over on Midwinter's side, as well as using the Stampeding Roar, trying to get through this area as quickly as possible, trying to minimize as much trash as they can actually use.
And we see Method actually doing the exact same thing as well.
Yeah.
So they're up, Method is up on the final top tier of the Citadel, and they're beginning to engage the final set of guards right before Margok. So there are these sort of high guards outside his chamber, and then we'll see once the doors open, a final set of counselors inside, and then they'll be face to face with the final boss himself.
Yeah, both guilds actually very, very close on these trash pulls. Midwinter only a little bit behind. They actually have someone dipping very, very low there for just a second, but they were able to get him back up, no problem. Moving on here they're going through the King's Guards, but Method looking like they are just about to get through the last couple of them here on Guard Captain Thag here, trying to beat the crap out of him so they can get through that door and get in there and face off against the Imperator. Excuse me. It's a tough word, I'm sorry.
It's Latin for emperor, sorry. So yeah, these mobs, like the ogres are not about masses and masses of them. They're large, powerful creatures, so these pulls actually tend to have just, 3, 4 mobs in them that are very strong individually, as opposed to, a large group of orcs like you might see in places like Siege of Orgrimmar or Blackrock Foundry. Each of them is individually much more powerful, however.
Both tanks just died on Method's side on this trash pull. They died one right after the other. They were able to get the battle res out on Sko to get him back up, so it looks like they are going to be able to recover from that, but there are a couple of dead DPS at this point. Yeah, both are DPS that are dead. Oh, and Sko actually goes down again. That's going to spell a lot of trouble for them. They're taking a lot of damage here. Sko is back up. They're doing their best to try and recover from this. They are now back once again at full capacity. Some people sitting very, very low, though. You can see all of this damage going out. Just constantly.
So this is a very These trash mobs have very, very movement-intensive mechanics, as you can obviously see. It's almost constant eruptions coming from the ground under you. If you're taking it more slowly and deliberately, you can manage that better. But when you're trying to, take them all on at once aggressively like this, there is very little margin for error, and it's quite possible to get juggled and have unfortunate things happen to you. But looks like they're working through it. Looks like they're recovering.
Yep. Yeah.
Still a couple deaths here and there. And really, that's like, they're not going to probably outright wipe to this, but those deaths slow them down.
Yeah,
and every second is precious when it's as close as this race is.
Yep, but of course, the way to get ahead in a race like this is to take those little risks as much as you possibly can. If they pay off, then they can be a huge advantage. If they don't, then you might find yourself in trouble. So Method has recovered at this point, and they are still in the lead as Midwinter is still working on Guard Captain Thag, but they will be catching up here very, very shortly into this last bit of trash, as it looks like Method is now gaining access to the Inner Sanctum here.
Yep, Method approaching the final pull before the boss, and Midwinter is probably about to be. So these are, again, as opposed to the more melee-oriented ogres outside, this is the council of ogre sorcerers that basically accompany the ogre emperor.
Yeah, these guilds are very, very close at this point. Midwinter was only a few seconds behind actually opening that door. So doing a great job sort of capitalizing on that little bit of a sort of a shaky moment there from Method as they were clearing that trash. Midwinter went through that flawlessly and was able to catch back up here. So we should be seeing a pretty close race right down to the wire here.
And yes, so in a long tradition of end bosses, Imperator Morgok is definitely the most challenging, the most elaborate encounter in this zone. And so in many ways, this is really what the whole thing can come down to. There's both opportunities to save time, but also the risk of a wipe, more so than on any other encounter that we've seen so far. So the way the fight works, just to begin introing it, since we're probably going to be seeing it in about 30 seconds to a minute or so, the Sorcerer King himself actually just has a handful of abilities that you see in the initial phase when you first engage him. A few basic attacks, debuffs, a couple spells he casts, like 3 or 4 things to learn. But the key to his power are these artifacts, these runes of power that he has collected from around Draenor, and that really have led to his ascent as Emperor of the Ogres. And each one of them, as he activates them, will modify and enhance all of his abilities in different ways. So, for example, there's a rune of duplication that causes some of his effects to hit more targets, to spawn additional adds, or what have you. There's a rune that is a rune of displacement that makes an ability that normally does one thing also teleport its target, for example. And so we'll see how this works out as we can get right into the encounter. But the basic idea from a design perspective was setting it up so you had to learn 3 or 4 things initially and then layered variants on top of them.
Kneel and swear fealty to me, but I may yet spare your lives for my You will learn.
And there it goes. Imperator Morgok has been pulled. Method still very much in the lead, but Midwinter very close behind.
Yeah, the gap has almost completely disappeared. Midwinter is a few seconds away from pulling. What was once a 45-second gap is now 10 seconds.
Yep,
if that.
Both guilds now on Imperator Morgok. Only about a 7%, 6% advantage for Method at this point. Very, very close here. And as I was saying, it's a very long and complex encounter. All sorts of things could happen. There's the Arcane Aberration. They're going to have to kill that pretty quickly here.
Okay, this initial stage, for example, you see the skull mark player in the lower right that just ran off the screen for Method. It gets a simple ability that's very similar to Baron Geddon's Living Bomb from 10 years ago, right? It's one of the simplest abilities you can get. You have a debuff on you. When it expires, you're going to blow up.
We have a healer down for Method. Does get that battle res and top back off, but that was a very, very tense moment there for Method, well, and that doesn't mean that they've used...
That's the key thing. It means they have no battle reses for the next couple of minutes at least. So if they make more mistakes, that can cost them dearly. So that was just the basic version of that ability from Margok, but as we go later in the fight, you'll see that empowered with displacement, for example, it also teleports the target randomly around the room. Or when empowered with fortification, it roots them and changes the gameplay, so now the whole raid has to run away from them instead of the reverse.
This is very, very close now. Midwinter is still killing the Arcane Aberration at the moment, but the DPS on Imperator Margok is only a couple of percentage points off. It's getting very, very close, dipping very low on Midwinter's side there for just a second. Methods as well. These guys are taking a lot of damage. They're doing as much as they can to push as much damage as possible, and it makes things very, very hard for the healers when you do that. Very risky maneuvers. Only a 3% difference in DPS between these two guilds at this point.
And so there are phase transitions here where every 30% health or so, the Emperor will go into an immunity phase where he channels on the next rune and absorbs its powers, adds spawn. And so it's a 4-phase fight with 3 intermissions is the overall structure. And it gets increasingly difficult as the fight progresses. So yeah, those large circles on the ground that you see are basically, void zones, arcane mines, area denial the players are going to have to stay away from, and the room becomes increasingly restricted as the fight goes on.
Yeah, looking like both guilds pretty stable at the moment. There's that big AoE damage ring coming out on Midwinter's side, but they react to that perfectly, no problem whatsoever. Healers keeping everybody topped off. Method side still very, very stable. The DPS once again is so close, only a 2% difference, although Midwinter does have to kill off this Arcane Aberration before they can get back to Margok. But this is an incredibly close race.
Yes, so it looks like Method has gotten that second intermission. They're transitioning into phase 3 at 55%. And so new adds are spawning as that occurs. And Midwinter is 1% away from hitting that too.
Such power! It takes form to destroy you!
So we do have these two Gorian War Mages out. Method obviously choosing to focus one of those down first. Pretty good strategy. Kill one of them, then kill the other.
Yes, they're both very dangerous casters that need to be interrupted and controlled, and if you let them get out of hand, they can quickly just start picking off members of your raid. There's also this inherent DPS check in that you really, really don't want to have those ogres still up as the next phase begins, because that's an additional layer of complication that you have to handle. So you're really focusing everything possible to finish them off either right before or pretty much right as Margok becomes active again.
And we actually sort of see Midwinter trying to squeeze themselves a little bit of an advantage here, potentially, whereas Method fully focused on one more War Mage and then killed the other. Midwinter actually has one of them at about 50% and the other now down at 12%, so they're trying to split their DPS, do as much cleave damage as possible. May work out for them, though. One War Mage is about to go down. They are taking a ton of damage as this is happening. The other War Mage should fall shortly thereafter. And there's the first one. Second one should be falling here very, very shortly. I'm not sure that they really got a whole ton of extra speed out of that, though.
Yeah, it seems like there was no really clear advantage gained, but in any case, both guilds are still in the same place now. They're both in phase 3 fighting Margok, Method at 47%, and yeah, Midwinter 4 or 5% behind. So yeah, this second runic empowerment phase, Margok is now drawing upon a rune of fortification, which does the aforementioned root ability that I mentioned with the living bomb effect, where the person who gets that on them gets rooted to the ground, the whole raid has to move away from them. The adds that are summoned have more health, and other things occur, those expanding rings occur multiple times. In general, every ability is modified and enhanced in a different way. It changes up the strategy for how you have to approach it.
Yeah, once again settling into about a 5 or 6% difference in terms of overall DPS here. Midwinter actually falling a little bit further behind. That cleave strategy that they were trying to do didn't seem to work out super well for them on those the War Mages just a second ago. But anything can happen at this point, really. This fight, it gets more and more difficult as time goes on. We can see over on Method's side, they're actually having a lot of people dipping even lower than they have through the entire encounter so far, while someone really low over on Midwinter's side, looks like a mage dipping very low, is going to be top back off, got himself a nice little absorb shield there at the last second to keep him alive. 37% now on Margok for Midwinter, 30%, 29% now for Method, so Method actually pulling ahead here as time goes on.
Yeah, at this point, I mean, this is looking like it's going to be Methods unless something goes wrong, but you never know.
Yeah.
So we're going to be coming up very soon on the final intermission, the final phase transition, and Method has just hit that right now, or is about to, at 25%. So this is the largest wave of ogres yet, and introducing 2 types simultaneously. There's a lot to keep up with here. You're almost inevitably going to have one of those powerful ogre guardians still up going into the final burn down on the boss, so there's a lot more to manage.
And Midwinter very close behind at 27% themselves. They are about to hit this same phase. Method already has one of their War Mages down to 36% and falling rapidly. So they are definitely very much ahead at this point in this phase. They're going to have that first War Mage down before they even spawn on Midwinter's side. So that's definitely a strong advantage for Method at this point. Sko dipping very, very low. They cannot afford to lose a tank right now, not with those War Mages running around. So very tense moment, but looks like they've recovered and they are just plowing through these War Mages right now. War Mages now up on Midwinter's side. Once again, they are opting to try and cleave them down a little bit. It may actually work out a little bit better for them with 3 of them there, because that's more damage, but unfortunately they have lost a DPS. One of them has gone down. They're going to have to get him battle res. That battle res is incoming. Should be able to take that here momentarily. There he is, popping back up again. Midwinter back to full strength, but Method just looking flawless as they're moving through this transition. The last War Mage for Method has fallen at this point. They are back on Margok.
Yep, and a mere 23% of Margok's health stands between Method and victory here in our live raid today. Midwinter is still finishing up that transition phase. They're cleaving all 3 down simultaneously, and they seems like they got it under control, though. Margok's going to be coming out of that transition very shortly.
And it does definitely seem like they saved themselves a lot of time on that transition. This time they went down much faster for Midwinter than they did for Method. Oh, but they lost, was that a tank? I'm not sure, actually. They lost somebody. Went down there for a second. Does pop back up. Yes, it does look like that was a tank death there. Very scary moment, but it happened right at the transition, so they were able to recover from that. No problem. Over on Method's side, 14% Trekkie dip. To the end, they are at 11%. Only 10% health now stands between them and the victory. Midwinter has them at 17%. They're a little bit behind. So Method, it's theirs to win at this point.
Yep.
Pulling it home.
It's that 5-6% health gap that we've seen most of the way through this particular encounter. But yeah, Method, like we've seen, Midwinter, the risk is you increasingly have to get reckless because they have to know they're a little bit behind at this point. Taking chances, it's been paying off so far, but not quite enough to narrow the gap. And Midwinter has a shaman go down, but they pop right back up, presumably reincarnation.
Method at 2% though on Imperator Margok. There's one more big AoE going on. They do lose one person. 1% though, another death. There it is!
All right. So congratulations to Method, once again, returning defending champions of the live raid. Midwinter still in good shape, though. They're going to finish it off very shortly.
Absolutely. They're not giving up on this whatsoever. They got to finish this, bring it home. 4% for Midwinter now at this point. Margok is doing his best to survive. There's a bunch of deaths. That's now 6 deaths on Midwinter's side. 7 deaths. It's 3% left. They can still pull it home here. Not much farther to go. 2% health on Margok. That's 1%. Tank dipping very, very low. But they can do this here. They've got enough people left, and there it is.
Congratulations to both of our guilds. Amazing job from both of them. Again, this was something that, this is obviously not the hardest difficulty of the content, but this is something that really only had a chance to practice on a handful of occasions on a few days over the course of the summer as we were beta testing the content. So it's awesome to see them coordinate and pull this together. Now that we have a little bit of extra time, I'd actually like to hear a little bit from some representatives from each of the guilds, maybe find out, what you think made